Ladies and gentlemen, this is the main event of the evening.
Give me a moment, would you, friend? I've never been on trial for my thoughts before.
Welcome to the Only One Mic podcast. I'm your host, Carl Gerard. Today I'm joined by journalist, documentarian, producer, and filmmaker, Carlos P Beltran. How you doing, Carlos?
Doing well, thanks, man.
All right. Glad that you was able to join us today. Carlos is an award-winning documentarian, and his work focuses on a wide range of issues from civil rights to human interest stories in Latin America and the U.S. He's been featured in many of the leading news outlets. What are some of the outlets that you're featured in, Carlos?
Yeah, well, I run the gamut. NBC News, ABC News, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, Latin outlets like Univision and Telemundo as well. Yeah.
All right. You took time to talk to us, man. I appreciate that because you're a busy dude, man. Busy dude. Now, I was going over some of your work. Very interesting stuff. So you're originally from Caracas, Venezuela. Is that correct?
That is right. Yeah, born and raised.
Born and raised. All right. Now you're in my hometown of Brooklyn. And how you like it so far?
I love it. I've been moved over here, transplant to Brooklyn in 2015. So it's been, 6 years going on, 7?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you came in right around the time to change, so you caught it at a good time, for real. What was it like growing up in Caracas?
It's a 4.5 million people city. Caracas now is known, people who know it, as kind of a controversial, very dystopian sort of kind of contrasty city. The gap between those who have and have not is quite broad, and you have political turmoil, hyperinflation. So it wasn't an easy city. But I was born and raised until I was 16 years old, and then I was lucky that I was able to finish up high school in the U.S. For an exchange program. I wasn't planning on it, but it just happened. And then my life just kind of derailed into, in a good way, into the U.S., giving me that opportunity to have the background of having, been born and raised in Latin America, but also being in the Midwest, Kansas, and getting to know the U.S. from its very much inside. And the rest is history. I've been pretty much everywhere in the U.S. and many places in Latin America as well as a journalist. And for personal reasons as well. And
where did you attend college at? You attended college in Kansas, or was it something else?
Yes. I got a small scholarship from the University of Kansas. Their journalism program is actually outstanding. Not a whole lot of people think about Kansas as for one reason or another, as a state with journalism and media, school, but it actually helped quite a lot, and I loved it. And because of my education in Kansas, I got opportunities up on the West Coast and eventually in the East Coast. But University of Kansas. I graduated in 2009.
Okay. What attracted you to journalism?
To me, is about storytelling. Of course, it's a broad question because you can talk about, the ethics and morals and then the responsibility that we have as journalists to tell stories, the unbiased way around it. But I've always seen myself as a storyteller first and foremost. And I ended up in journalism because I always wanted to do creative things, right? I actually I have a background in advertising as well. So storytelling has always been a very intrinsic part of my life as a professional and on a personal level. And suddenly I understood that, when it comes to journalism, as long as you have a camera, a microphone, and a subject, then you could tell a story, if you knew how to go about it, And that was the spark. That was the spark for it. And I'm lucky that today I get to make a living off of telling stories. Some stories I'm very passionate about. Some stories just need to be told because they're in the news cycle.
Right.
But it's storytelling nonetheless. So.
Yeah, I just had an interview last night, and I was telling the young lady that I interviewed, and I said the same thing: is that there's stories out here that need to be told. Like, it's just like people like yourself. Like, a lot of people don't know what happens behind the scenes in journalism because we only look at the major networks and see what goes on when they're sitting behind the desk with the teleprompter. But your work have you right on like the front line. Some of the stuff that you've done, I know you've covered the protests of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, which was, very violent protests. And you were right like in the thick of it. So you seen everything, boots on the ground. And you also sat down with like a lot of hardcore drug dealers. They were doing their thing. How do you get people to sit down with you and be comfortable enough to do this in front of you? Because normally there was a code, like when you were doing these things, that you didn't put this out there for public consumption because it was too indicting. How do you get people to be comfortable enough to do this? To sit down, like how do you even make the approach?
So in the most general sense, I don't believe in being able to tell compelling stories through parachute journalism. You can't just pop up somewhere and in one day or two get your story and get the hell out. You get only the gist of it. You need to be able to have your foundation. And I did cover Venezuela for 4 to 5 years. And the stories that you mentioned, me being able to do stories on cocaine traffickers in the slums of Venezuela, or cover in a very in-depth way the riots and political turmoil over there, come from me having made contacts with many, call them subjects or characters in the zeitgeist of Venezuelan pop culture and the streets, For example, you mentioned the cocaine traffickers. That's just because I made the approach because I knew that I wanted to tell, I had, brush with that world because of the many stories that I had told over the years. But my freelancer, I guess the person who took me from one place to the other, he had contacts, he had friends, he introduced me. I spent about a week or two just making, acquaintances, if not friends. That's too much of a word. If I'm a journalist, I'm just making acquaintances with these folks. And in the end, their ego pushed them to say, I don't care, put a camera on me and I'll tell you whatever it is you want to hear. And then that's how I did it. In that specific instance, but it's a case by case basis. My only general rule is, don't try to, or even pretend that you're going to be able to tell a full-on in-depth story in just 1 or 2 days, popping up somewhere without contacts or, prep work,
Right. So in those situations, like I know you've dealt with various situations, and people like understand that he's not just doing, violence and crime. Like there's a lot of good human interest stories. Go to Carlos P Beltran. .com, look at some of his videos. A lot of it is not violence. It's a lot of good human interest stuff out there. What is the most interesting situation you've been in while covering a story? Like, these are dangerous situations in most cases. Do you put yourself in a situation where you're thinking like, what did I get into? Like, where is this going? Yeah,
definitely. Well, let me just touch on that point. I've covered everything from political turmoil in South America to trends in the U.S. So I literally have done pieces on what ASMR means or what the meaning of death is over here. I mean, just name or what the death positivity movement is, or so a little bit of everything. To answer your question, sometimes, especially when I'm 35 right now, when we're younger storytellers, I'm sure that I made very foolish decisions. I felt like I had no responsibility other than tell my story, and I didn't really, I made very rash decisions. Luckily, I'm lucky to be able to say today that it's all been for the better. But you always have to, be conscious of the decision that you're taking, the repercussions. In 2016, I was telling a story along with ABC News. And we were, once again, I've already been based in New York, but I traveled to Venezuela to tell a story on government-run hospitals and hyperinflation and the medical, medicine shortage in the country.
Right.
And the correspondent and I were caught filming inside of a government-run hospital. And, obviously it's a story that is not favorable to the government. The government is does not see with keen eyes, foreign journalism. So I spent 5 days inside of political prison in Venezuela, not knowing that I was going to spend 5 days over there. At that point,
Wow.
you think the worst. I was Venezuelan. I am Venezuelan. So, I thought that I might be, I would have been made what do you call it? An example of.
Right.
But so those were extremely very, very long 5 days. And fortunately, after, what probably sounds like a, Born Identity, movie, then we were able to leave the country, and that was that. But it's I definitely made some decisions that weren't the most, reasonable ones, just
Right.
for the sake of telling a story. Not illegal, not immoral, and definitely not ethically countered, journalism. Not at all. It just knowing the place, knowing the country, knowing the laws, and knowing the situations. I made decisions that ended up in us being, behind bars for 5 days. But so that's probably one of my most interesting ones. I've been named on national television in South America as well as a trader.
Oh, wow.
So those are kind of like appetizers that I throw over there, because they sound sensationalistic, but they do speak of the the commitment that I've had to my work. Because I'm still a journalist nowadays. I'm not managing a bar or
Yeah.
or moved on to any other realm of storytelling.
Yeah, that's some dangerous stuff, man. So you still labeled a trader there. You still go back.
So I haven't been back to Venezuela since 2017, but you have your contacts. As if I have to go, you make sure that's as much as you can. That there's no problem. But like I said, it's 2021 and I haven't been there in 4 years, and it's for a reason. So I'm trying to make more sensible choices. These days.
Now, what is the story that touched you the most?
That's difficult because there's been many. There was a story I did back in 2018. I interviewed I spent some time, really. Interview is not really the right thing, the right word. A man in Rochester, New York, and he told me about the many, many months that he spent with his then girlfriend, who had a very slow and painful death. And so he was making the case for what some people are referred to as assisted suicide, which is not the right word. You don't say assisted suicide anymore. I just can't think of the term. But basically, it's illegal in the city of New York to be able to euthanasia. I guess it's illegal.
Yeah,
it's illegal in the state of New York. So I interviewed a few people over here. First, that man who told me about his girlfriend, and then an older woman who was very ill, who wanted to. So that puts you in a space where you're trusted with a camera. And I spent a couple of days with a woman who basically wanted to pass. But it was not legal for her to do it in New York, to have anybody help her pass in New York, and she didn't have the wherewithal to move to a state that would allow her to go through the process. So of course, here I'm breaking that rule that I have of not just jumping into a story, being able to tell that, because I did spend a couple of days with each of these people, but I did a lot of prep work. So a lot of phone calls before I showed up over there. But at any rate, that's one of the stories that, if you ask me, pops up, right away. But I've done stories on family separations in the U.S. and on political asylum seekers in the U.S. that also, are quite emotional and emotionally draining as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. Now, for the young journalists that's out there, how do you actually come up with the stories? Because you're in New York right now, and there's no shortage of stories in New York at all. So
you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
Really?
In New York, in New York there are stories, but a lot of people are fishing for the same. So it's like being in a pond filled with fish that everybody else is fishing. So if you're slightly late, then somebody has already stole that story,
Okay.
So a lot of people ask me, so in New York, you probably have a story to tell every single day. Somebody else is telling that story. You have to move quick. You still have to have an in. Doesn't matter if you're in Iowa or you're in New York or you're in Caracas. You still need to move into certain circles, have your freelancers to help you around, or have have a bit of a network. So when a story comes up that it's in your beat or in your interest, someone helps you to get there to that story, normally. So, and I didn't let you finish your question.
No, you're good.
I didn't want to make it.
Because I was wondering if you were going to answer it within that, because sometimes that happens, man. So, like, how do you find these stories? Do you, like, I know you say you have your contacts and all. Like, as a journalist, like, how do you actually sniff out these stories? Like, how do you know which one is the one, and how do you actually approach whatever news outlet you're working with at that time to say, this is the story that I want you guys to back my play on? How would you do that for the journalist that's out there?
It's all about pitching a story. I think that now there, 10 years ago, it's more difficult for just new graduate, new journalists to just say, hey, I'm going to pick up a camera and I'm going to pitch this story to National Geographic and say what they say. Now there's many outlets or networks that connect you directly with the network. And nowadays, because there's, let's just be honest, there's the market of non-fiction, storytellers can seem to be quite saturated. So it's all about your reel. It's all about the stories that you've told. So let me just answer in two different parts. First, if you want to get into telling stories, if you want to be commissioned by a network to tell your story, my first advice, and this just worked for me, it just is not the rule, it just worked for me, go tell a story that you care about for no money. Do it in your own time, something that you really care about, and craft something that you're incredibly proud of.
Right.
Then that is your presentation card. That's your business card. It doesn't matter if you went to Columbia University. It doesn't matter if you went Barclay School. It doesn't matter if you went to CalArts. It doesn't matter where you went to. And that's my belief. If you have a reel or a story or a work sample that says, I can do this, I am a storyteller, then that's your door opener. And I can tell you that from experience. Look at me. I mean, I don't have a master's degree. I have a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Kansas. And I've been lucky enough to travel to more places than I thought that I would, precisely because I spent probably 4 years, three years of my life, back when it was not that easy, or when the gear wasn't that, proficient, telling stories of my own and going to film festivals and whatnot. I built my name. Nowadays, you can just, grab a camera for $1,200 or less if it's used, and then, shoot in 4K with have a microphone and spend a month telling a story that you really care about. Cut something, 2 minutes long, 5 minutes long, different formats, and then that's your presentation card. It's much, much easier and faster when I was doing it. So that's in one sense. And the other is, look, you're not going to pitch, you understand the network. If you're trying to pitch a story to, and by the way, use LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, you can reach out to a lot of people, pay for the LinkedIn professional, and then you get to reach out to the editors of any network if you want to pitch them. Or, talk to people that you might know from your networks. If you know me, you can pitch directly to NBC at this particular point in time. But my advice would be, know the network. If you're going to pitch the New York Post, for example, it's not the same as if you were to pitch to the New York Times. Physical media and print. The pitches would be completely different. Is that what you're saying? Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, in a sense, when it comes to story, you're talking about a difference of maybe format or a difference in logistics. But the story is the story, whether it's in print or video. However, the New York Post releases or publishes stories that are different from those released by the New York Times. They also have different standards. Right. Same with any other network. So you're not going to pitch a story about tax evasion to National Geographic, because it makes no sense. National Geographic is not going to take up that story, right? So the New York Post likes more, upbeat, more character profile, kind of gritty, sex appeal type of stories. Almost tabloid-like. To be honest with you, yeah, sure, that kind of thing. And by the way, I'm very good friends with the folks in the video department of the New York Post. I've done plenty of work for them. In fact, the cocaine traffickers in Venezuela story, I did that for the New York Post. They allowed me to tell that story, but it was gritty. It was real. It's different than if you were to pitch, say, to ABC News under a different standard. Maybe ABC News would have told you, oh, look, if these people are doing cocaine in front of you, maybe that's something that we cannot air,
Right.
So, and that's just an example. So that's just for you to really know who you're pitching this story. Otherwise, you're just throwing, darts in the dark.
With the mediums too that we all use these days, everybody's pretty much becoming a journalist at this point.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, but it's also different. And I think that at some point very soon, we're going to make the distinction between a journalist and a documentarian, or, just a storyteller.
Right.
And I guess this is very timely. I'm not sure when you'll publish this, but the Anthony Bourdain documentary dropped, I guess, a week or two ago.
Right.
And there's been a lot of talk about how the director made choices that are not strictly journalistic, but they're more stylistic in the storytelling world. For example, they used AI, artificial intelligence, to mimic the voice of Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, I heard about
reading
that.
through some text. Right. So that is something that in journalism and for any network that you're working for, you will never be able to do. However, this is a documentary. This is storytelling. And documentaries, for the most part, are the vision of the filmmaker, of the director. So you have some flexibility. So when you talk about nowadays everybody's a journalist, I would say nowadays everyone has the capability. It's more feasible, not everybody, but most people have the feasibility of becoming a storyteller because you can have a camera, a microphone, a subject, and if you know how to edit, then you can tell these stories in a very appealing, stylistic way. Is that journalism? Well, it depends, and I'm hoping that at no point we're gonna run into the question of what is journalism versus what is art versus what is documentary, because it can get very ambiguous and blurred. But so that's that's my 2 cents on on the whole. Everybody's a journalist. I believe everybody can be a storyteller.
Right.
Journalism holds standards of ethics and legalities that documentarians don't have to uphold themselves to, strictly speaking.
Yeah, so like in certain specials, you can't air, like you said, on ABC where someone's doing drugs or someone's on drugs or something like that, whereas the regular person puts that on YouTube. They just put it out on YouTube. So and also it's like the network standards, right? We're talking about as well, not just the like ABC News itself standards, but it's also network standards, if I'm correct. That it's just certain things you can't show with certain times. And even though TV is like anything goes these days, but I understand what you're saying, because that's not an actual story with characters. Those are actual people, and you have to be sensitive to that subject.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. And there's so many differences. Like people would ask you, well, what do you want to tell? I'm sorry, I have a. This is New York.
This is New York, man.
Sirens. Yeah.
I go to sleep to those noises, so I understand. Yeah.
Exactly. But no, look, when you talk about, and you can also get into the whole topic of what's shareable, what's popular. Like if how many views can I get for this story on something that's super interesting. But look, look at TikTok. Look at Snapchat seems like almost obsolete now. But look at TikTok. Like anything over there can be popular, made popular, and has millions of views. Has nothing to do with journalism or even storytelling. It's just something. It's a character. It's something that's happening that becomes popular. So I am of the thought that successful journalism has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with views. It doesn't matter if 5 people watched a video that you made, or, I guess if 3 million people have watched it, but views should not be the standard of quality journalism. I've seen plenty of incredible journalism pieces out there that only get a handful, just dozens, or maybe 1,000 or 2 views. As opposed to something that is, has nothing to do with journalism, but it's, catchier, or it's an explainer, or it's just more, visually sparkling, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
And that's another conversation of its own. It just, it's always troubled me when we talk about the quality of a piece in terms of how viral or not a video that you make, is. Yeah.
So do you work directly in the newsrooms, or they just, call you in when you have something to present, or are you there on a daily basis? How does that work?
At this point in time, so let me talk. For most of my career, I worked as a freelancer. Basically, I traveled to wherever it is that I wanted to travel, and I pitched a story from where I was, and then I pitched to several networks, and whoever bit, then I did the story for them. Now I work for NBC News. Now, as of August 2021, I work for NBC News exclusively. So I am in the newsroom. I have a beat, which is climate. So all my stories have to be in a way related to that. But so it's a different world, because now I'm inside of the beast, as you would, and I am. And I'll speak very candidly, because a lot of people ask me what the differences between being a freelancer or being staffed, are, and many. And I've lived many years as a freelancer. I have colleagues who have gone from being staffed to freelancers, and I myself went from freelancer to staff. So for anyone out there wondering what's better, there's not such answer. It just depends where you are in your life. I'm in the point in my life where I want to be able to have the opportunity to tell stories that I care about with a network that I actually care about, but also it gives me some sort of security, the fact that I do have a steady paycheck. Right. However, as a freelancer, I love being able to just travel wherever I wanted and then pitch story wherever I was. But then, certain degree of risk comes with that approach, because what if nobody buys this story and you already spent the money to be somewhere, So it can get a little tricky. There's a certain degree of leverage that you have to have. You give a little to get a little.
Yeah. How hectic is a day in a newsroom? I know a lot of people probably listening is wondering, because today was a pretty interesting news day, if you know what I mean, with the whole homo situation. Yeah. So how hectic is like an average day? Your average day. I mean, if you know nothing of the newsroom, then you think that your average day is like the stock market. A bunch of journalists just screaming and smoking and saying, F you, whatnot, you gotta get this story out. That's not how it is at all. And it's because most newsroom nowadays are so compartmentalized, you have different beats. Like I, for example, did not cover the Cuomo stuff because I'm climate. So I have nothing to do with that. And my day is so busy that even though I know what's happening with them, I'm not talking to my senior editors or executive directors about that story. So it's very busy, but nowadays it's very busy with calls. Like I literally, after this interview with you, I'm going to sit down with my associate producer and talk about this story on farmers in the West Coast and, rising temperatures, and so we're going to talk about how to craft that story to present it and pitch it to different news shows, right? Like at NBC, we have the Today Show, Nightly News, NBC News Now. So internally, we have to pitch to these shows. So I think the whole coming up with ideas and pitching is something that will never end. If you're a storyteller, you're going to have to pitch stories, come up with them, whether it's just from reading articles to, eavesdropping to whatever. But everybody's looking for the next big story. And believe me, if you've read it in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, then the story's already been told. Chances are that unless you find a different angle, you're not going to be able to tell that story successfully. No one's going to buy it. So research, and, trying to find a beat that works for you. More research, just for like doing these podcasts and stuff. Yours is like on 20, in terms of research, so I understand. Now, getting back to the whole thing with you starting in journalism and what attracted you to journalism and all, tell us about your first big break. What was it? Do you remember what story, got you in there, and how did you feel when you first saw like, this is my work that's being displayed right now?
So when it comes to my big break in journalism is different than my big break as a storyteller. I remember that, and just to tell it quickly, as a storyteller, I began in advertising. And I remember that at some point I was directing commercials with 150 extras with one of the best directors of cinematography in my country. And, so I felt, and I was only 25, 26 at the time. So I felt like I had a huge future in that industry.
Right.
And then I got sick of advertising. My big break in journalism probably was in 2014. I was at the right time at the right place, even though it might have not seemed like it.
Right.
2014, I was in Caracas, and there were very violent riots in Venezuela for several reasons. And I remember I was one of the few journalists at the time who was producing stories exclusively for US-based networks. And I remember I got a call from Fusion TV.
Oh, Fusion.
I don't know if, Fusion, I don't know if it's a thing anymore, Fusion, but they reached out and they said, look, we want you to film dispatches for us every day, just for 4 or 5 days. Go film and give us dispatches on these stories. And at the time, they were paying me something that nobody else had ever paid me, for like in terms of like actual money, cash. And I thought, holy crap, okay. And I worked extremely hard for 5 days. I filmed and I edited, I delivered, filmed the morning and afternoon, edited and delivered at night. And I made, at the time, what I thought it was quite a bit of money. And then that just derailed into me being able to do then stories for AJ Plus and from Univision, and then ABC News reached out to me, and NBC News, and the New York Post. So it was like a domino effect to me, if you understand.
Yeah,
so,
like one thing just completely led to another,
exactly.
was led to another.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember it was probably back in 2014, that I was also doing stories prior to this call, when they asked me to do dispatches. I remember that I got a gig literally just doing camera for AJ Plus, and it was like only like 3 hours of me just holding my B camera, and they paid me like $300 for that, and I took the job. I mean, it was definitely I was more skilled than just that, but I took it because of the badge, because of being able to say I did something for this network,
right.
And I did it so well, and I gave them such great service that I know that I can use them as a reference. And that's, swallowing your ego or saying, look, I know that I can do better things, but I'm gonna get my contacts, on, and I'm gonna get references. I'm gonna do that, even though I'm much more skilled, even though I can do many more things. I want to work on my image. And I did that. And again, like you said, it's a domino effect. One thing led to the other. At the end of, a year or 2 years, 3 years, I had references and, named the network, and I work with them or for them. It's been a lot of work. It's been, it's not something that you can, I don't know, maybe a lot of people don't like to listen to this because people usually like to hear, oh, here's the secret, or here's the magic pill you take, and then, you're all of a sudden you've made it. I think it all starts with you doing something, as cheesy as it sounds, do something that you really like and care about. If what you care about is telling stories, then you're going to learn not only to write those stories, you're not only going to learn how to interview people, you're going to learn how to shoot it. How you're going to learn to tell a story with only one camera. If you only have one camera, you're going to learn how to tell a story with 2 cameras, but only one person manning those cameras. And then you're going to learn how to edit that story in the best way possible. And you're going to invest in your gear and in your resources. And then, at the end of the day, because you love it and you're so proficient at it and so passionate about it, people will see that and people will give you the job. And a little tip to people interviewing for jobs. The best way to go about it is not writing a cover letter, when you're applying for jobs. Right. Not at all. Something that I've said in interviews that I've had is literally, look, I can be, and I have a very silly sense of humor, but what I tell people when I'm talking to them is, look, I can be a really good interview or a bad interview, but at the end of the day, the quality of my work is what you're looking for, at least in this industry. Right. So look at my work, and that doesn't show arrogance, because I don't believe in being arrogant at all, but I believe in being confident in your work. I'm actually, as a person, I'm very kind of an introvert, but when it comes to my work, is if you look at my work, then that will show you why we're talking right now. Right. Then you, potential employer, if you look at my work, really look at it. And then if you're interested, let's talk again. If not, you don't have to talk to me ever again. but my value is in my work, not in how I can sell myself verbally on paper. And that's just because I'm too long-winded, as you probably have seen or heard.
Good.
And also, I don't like selling myself on paper, and I like my work to speak for myself. And I've been lucky to be able to do so much work that's how I present myself. Don't talk to me, don't read me, look at my work, and then we talk if you're interested in working with me.
Yeah, because if you just talking, man, you're just selling wolf tickets, as we said growing up, And
right.
If you can't back that up, you got a problem. Right. That's a big issue you left out there. But your work. Folks, he has been winning awards since like 2011. National Headliner Award, Telly Award. I'm just going to big you up, man. I know you're not going to do it for yourself. So, National Emmy nomination, Outstanding Feature in Spanish, New Media Film Festival, winner of the New Media Film Festival, social issue documentaries. We didn't see the last of this stuff. Now, I know that you said you were working on a story about farming. Is there any other work that you're working on now outside of that particular story, or is there something coming down the pike we need to know about?
It's so interesting. What I can talk about is my personal work. I can't tell you about the work that I'm doing with NBC.
Oh, yeah, the personal is what I want. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been working for 4.5 years as a side project. It's a very important project to me. It's a feature documentary, my first one, in association with the NBA. It's a story about how fleeting a career in the NBA can be. Most people don't know that an average career in the NBA is only 4.5 years long.
Right.
Most people don't know that since 2010, more than 800 pro athletes have had to leave the NBA due to career-ending injuries. Most people don't know that basketball is much more of a higher impact sport nowadays than even football. It sounds crazy, but or injury-prone sport. So I've been working on this documentary for 4.5 years, following the life of a former NBA player. His name is Gravis Vasquez. Right. He was one of the best pilots in the league. Or assisting pilots in the league, but he suffered an injury and had to leave the Brooklyn Nets in 2016, and he left saying, "I'm going to be back." So from 2016 till today, we've been filming with him as he's gone through every single version of his grief. It's like anger, denial, and finally acceptance and moving on forth. We've been able to interview Kevin Durant for the documentary, Manu Ginobili. If you're into basketball, you know who those people are. So that is my passion project. It's one that's made me sweat, cry, bleed. Extremely difficult to put a project together and on an independent level like this. So difficult. But it's one that continues. And I'm also, if everything goes as planned, going to be releasing a book I've been working on since 2009.
Wonderful.
And it's a photo book on the streets of Venezuela in Caracas. I partner up with a self-taught poet who spent 8 years in prison. And she wrote the poetry for it, and I took the photos for the book in the span of 5 years. And we've been putting it together. We've been working hard on it for the past 3 years, and hopefully it'll come out in 2022. But so that will be out there as well. These are side projects. I do believe that if you have a job that takes up most of your time or mental capacities, then for your mental health, having a side project to put your energy into and get some sort of other kind of reward is very important. So I'm lucky to have 2 projects that have been ongoing for years, and I'm hoping that I'll see them through.
Well, I'm going to have you make a commitment right now, if you could. When those projects come out, you got to come back and talk about them.
Sure thing, Carl.
You got to let me know, man, because that basketball documentary, is something that I think that kids can benefit from watching. I always tell kids, have a plan B. Everybody don't make the NBA. Or if you do, you're fortunate enough to do it, these situations come up, whereas you might get injured. And if basketball is all you know, You know, yeah, you're gonna have a problem. You might get in the NBA and might not actually be a star player. You can be a bench warmer, man. And at the end of the day, a bench warmer's check is not Kevin Durant's check. So you may not be able to sustain yourself for but so many years. And I think that's something that, don't get me started on that. I used to coach basketball. So, we definitely got to have you back to talk about that, because I think that's very important. Also with your other work as well. Very artistic work, and I definitely want to check it out. Now, one more thing, or at least one or two more things before I let you go. You gave me so much time, and I really appreciate it, Carlos. Do people get you confused with Carlos Beltran, the baseball player? Do you get that?
He's been my icebreaker for the past 10 years or 11 years. Yep. It's always a fun thing, to talk about. You always use that. My usual line is, no, I wish I had so much money, or yes, but I changed careers, or, that kind of stuff. But it always breaks the ice in a good way. You can't go wrong with a popular name, I suppose. Yeah,
he had his fair share of issues as well. So I think you're doing a little bit better. All right. And one more thing. I ask a lot of people this question in the hopes to make them think. What would the Carlos today, with all the accomplishments and all the things, all the projects, say to young Carlos from Venezuela? What would you tell yourself if you were able to do that?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. You know what? I would tell him everything happens for a reason. That's exactly what I would tell that person. I wouldn't tell him to work harder. I wouldn't tell him to be happier. I wouldn't tell him to be more secure, because all that could affect the way that you do things if we're really taking this hypothetical into reality. But I would understand that everything happens for a reason, because at the end of the day, what my life has taught me is that with every decision, there's a consequence, a butterfly effect. And I am where I am because of all the mistakes and all victories I've had since I decided to go into this career. So, yeah.
All right. So we thank you, Carlos, and I'm going to let you go. Folks, this is Carlos P Beltran. I encourage you, please check out his work. Carlos, can you tell us where we can find you on all your latest adventures, buddy?
Just at carlospbeltran.com or at Carlos P Beltran. That's my every social network. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And you can catch the Only One Mic podcast on Instagram and Twitter at the Only One Mic P1 and Facebook at the Only One Mic podcast. Also, you can contact us via email at theonlyonemic00@gmail.com. There you can post your comments, questions, anything that's on your mind. You can go ahead and leave it. Don't forget to like and subscribe when you do. Carlos, once again, thank you, my man. Thank you. I really appreciate you for coming on. Very insightful. And guys, make sure you look out for his work, please. And as always, I tell you to speak your truth quietly and clearly and listen to others, even the dull and the ignorant, because they too have their story to tell. Thanks again, Carlos.
Thank you.
All right. Take it easy, man. And the One Mic podcast is signing off. Peace.